Hi, heroes. I'm Stan Lee, and that's not your fault. You know, in a lot of shows like this, people start by saying, and now my guest needs no introduction. Well, I'm not sure Todd McFarlane needs an introduction, but I think he certainly deserves one. So let's get into this. Not only is he multi-talented, but there are many facets about Todd that you're going to learn as we move along. For example, he's not only one of the top artist writers in our business, but he's also something of an entrepreneur. He's going into a new business where he's producing his own trading cards, which he'll tell you about later. He owns a comic book store, which is not a bad thing for a guy in the business to do. He's a baseball player. He used to play, and I think still does, with a Pac-10. I'm sure a lot of you know what that means. He explained to me it's 10 teams in the Pacific League. And on top of that, he's one of the most dazzling talents in the comic book business. And now, since I've given him that magnificent build-up, I'm sure that he'll be real nice to me and be an easy guest to interview. And without further ado, because I don't have much ado to spare, here he is, the one and only Todd McFarlane.
Hey, Stan.
Hiya, Todd.
Hey, you sound just like my mom.
Listen, Todd,
Yep.
What I want to know is, before we get to the heavy stuff, you look about 12 years old.
Thank
I know
you.
you're a little older than that. But what about your early years? What about before you started in comics? Because so many people have asked me, hearing I was going to do this video cassette, how did he get into it? What was he like as a kid? How did he learn to draw the way he does in such a short period of time?
Actually, I think that I'm probably different than most of the guys that I admired when I was growing up, in that I didn't start collecting my first comic book till I was 17. So I was probably grade 11 or 12. Most guys seem to, you know, have read comic books since they were 5. I mean, we all had comic books as a kid. It wasn't like going to be an occupation of mine. So at about 17, for some reason, at that point, I was collecting trading cards, baseball cards, living down in Southern California. And one day, all of a sudden, I walked into a corner store, plunked down my $2 and came home with 6 comic books. And because I'm kind of a fanatical kid, within 2 weeks I was collecting every single comic book that was out on the stands. And it kind of gave me a focus to take my artwork. I'd always been doodling, and just like anybody else, and drawing since I was 5, I can remember, but I had no focus with it. And I think a lot of the kids out there, you know, that's one of the problems that they have. They can't seem to put themselves in a direction. But once I started collecting the books, all of a sudden I said, well, you start to read so many that some of them aren't that good, and you go, I think I could do a little bit better than this, and you start to get a bit cocky, and you're on your way.
So I guess one of the first things you need is some taste. You have to be able to know this stuff is good, this isn't that good, and I'm going to be influenced by the good stuff. I
don't even think it's, making that kind of judgment's pretty, I think you got to get cocky is what you got to do. I mean, because you got to think that you're better than a professional at that point. And if you don't, then there's no reason to do your samples. What I try to tell the kids is really, when you're going to do the samples, yeah, don't really look at the good guys all that much, because they break your heart, because they do things that mind boggle you. You know what I mean? So take the guys and try and redraw the stuff from the guys whose stuff you don't admire a lot of, because then it looks like, yeah, I'm better than that guy, I'm better than that guy, because if I'm redrawing Jack Kirby or Neil Adams or John Byrne stuff, I can't do that stuff, and I'm just going to get disappointed.
So then actually what you're saying is the opposite of what I said, that you're better off looking at the guys who aren't that good, because that'll give you more confidence. You know you can do better than they can.
Right, exactly.
Of course, in your case, though, what about when you first started? Certainly, when you were 17 or 15 or 14 or 11, you weren't better than these cartoonists then, but you must have known at some point you'd be able to be as good or better.
I think what ended up happening, I mean, the way that I taught myself, and I know I drive some of the older guys a little bit crazy, but you know, they say draw from life and go and look at the world and stuff. I tell the kids the opposite, you know, draw from comic books. And the reason is because the things that make comic books cool, in my opinion, are things like big laser guns, those monsters that are drooling and got big fangs on them, you know, guys that got capes that are 47 feet, like you can't see that in life. So, but those are the kind of things that visually make things entertaining to look at. So I always tell the kids, look at the comic books, but what I would do is I would just take like arms, and I draw arms for like a week. till I kind of had it figured out what an arm looked like. Then the next week I'd try to teach myself how to draw kneecaps. And I just, after about 2.5 months of placing all the pieces together, I kind of had a body. And then after that point, I had to like actually start to turn the body and try to do storytelling and go to the next level. So it was kind of a slow process for me.
Well, when you were drawing the arms and the bodies and so forth, where did you get them from? Did you take them from your own arm, or did you look at other drawings of arms, for example?
I mean, there's certain lines that are on comic books that you got to kind of place. I didn't really study muscle magazines, which a lot of guys do. And the reason is because I think that some of the guys that draw perfect can't really put the superheroes into certain poses that make them look dynamic. I mean, Jack Kirby, if he had put all the, kneecaps in the right place, couldn't have done those great poses. He needed to be able to warp the bodies around. But from my perspective, no, I watched, the one thing that I watched was teachers' hands. When I went to college, people used to talk and go like this. And the one word advice I had, they said, if you can draw great expressions of faces and great hands, the rest of the body doesn't really need to be there, because you can do a dramatic shot by going, a guy gritting his teeth and going like this. That gives a lot of emotion. So I watch people's hands a lot, and that was about the only thing I was conscious about.
That's interesting, because I always used to feel the hands and the faces were absolutely the most important two elements to get excitement and interest and drama in a panel. And we used to say to the artists years ago that you've got to make your characters look excited, because if they don't look excited at what's happening in the story, how can you convince the reader that it is an exciting incident if the characters participating look calm? So we always try to make the hands tense and the faces wide-eyed and the mouths open. And sometimes you can get two artists drawing a strip, and this is something you're so great at. Every panel you do looks exciting, but you can take the same story and let one artist, for instance, if somebody is supposed to be frightened, a monster is coming into a room, and you could have the person like this, oh, there's a monster. Or you could draw her or him like this, ah, a monster. Well, which one would you want to read, if you saw those two drawings? And usually you get that excitement with the hands and with the faces. Mm-hmm. But I think the body is kind of important, too. You've got to know what to do with the shoulders.
Yeah, well, the thing is, most superhero guys don't stand like we stand. In fact, they wouldn't sit at the table.
Bite your tongue.
No, wait, they wouldn't sit in a chair like this. They'd sit like this. Of course, they got the big bulging chest, and so everything is melodramatic. That's why I try to teach the kids that show me their portfolios, too, is overdo everything. I mean, like, keep knocking people over the head with the visuals, because, it is fiction, and people want to see something that's not real, I don't think, because otherwise they can read a novel or something like that. So you got to make it, and the scenes that are what we call pedestrian scenes, where John and Joe are talking out of costume, those ones, I always tell kids, you can still make those look exciting the same way that Alfred Hitchcock used to make them look exciting. Instead of doing a shot straight at my face, you can come up through the glass table, you can do a silhouette of them, you can shoot through the window that maybe's got the pane that's in checkerboards or something like. You can do a dramatic down shot. If Aunt May's pouring coffee, that's a pretty bland, stupid panel, but I could make that, I think, somewhat more visual to look at by either doing a close-up of her eye as the smoke or the steam's coming billowing out of the cup of coffee. I could show her reflection in a stainless steel canister that she's pouring. I mean, there's a lot of different ways, and I try to get the kids to think of the pedestrian panels a lot more, because then the action comes easy. If you can make somebody pouring coffee look good, then a guy getting blasted through a wall with a laser gun is a piece of cake, I guarantee.
Todd, you're a real comic book natural, because what you say, I think, is so important, especially if anyone watching this has aspirations of being a comic book artist, or even a writer. You've only got so many panels to tell the story, and if you have one dull panel on a page, you're really wasting about 1/6 of the page, and you're so right on, because anything can be made interesting. Somebody walking down the street, you say, what can you do with someone walking down the street? But as you mentioned, if you make it an angle shot looking up at them, maybe through some steam that's coming up from a grating or from a window. Gene Colan once once did a panel, I'll never forget, of a fellow opening a door. He had opened the door, and all Gene drew was the hand holding the doorknob, but he did it in a certain perspective and with his light and shading. I mean, it was as interesting a panel as you can get. So it just depends on your point of view, and I suddenly realized this is not Stan Lee giving a lecture, so let's get right back to you. Let me ask you something else.
Okay.
How do you manage to mix your personal life and your professional life? I mean, you've just, I should have mentioned in your introduction, despite and besides all the other things you are, you're also quite a happily married man who is now a new father.
Yep.
And I think we're very lucky in that your wife, Wanda, and your daughter, Cyan, are here with us tonight, and I have a feeling the people watching this would probably like to meet them. Do you think you could talk them into coming up here?
We can do it. If not, then I know Grandma wants to see them too, so.
Here are Todd's lovely wife, Wanda, and his lovely daughter, Cyan. As if by magic, they've appeared. Hi, glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Now, let's see. Cyan, first of all, you've been absolutely wonderful about this. You've stayed there and you haven't cried and you've stayed awake, and I know you'd rather take a nap. And I'm not going to keep talking because I know Todd wants to talk a lot about his wife and daughter. Go to it, buddy.
I think that one of the things that some of the people trying to break into comic books have to understand, you got to have a pretty understanding wife, I think. You know, and I hope other guys think that they also have the best wife, but I think I've got the best. She's stood by me for a lot of years. You're asking me about my work schedule. I've been able to, because of my success, been able to back away from it, but for a lot of years I had to put in those. And
those long hours.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, there's 7 days a week, you know, 80-hour weeks, week in, week out, and literally just come upstairs, get dinner, come downstairs, keep working. I mean, deadline. We've all had deadline problems, but it makes it a little bit easier when you have somebody there that is understanding about what you're doing, that's also encouraging along the way, and knows that hopefully it's not going to be forever, but that it's a means to an end and whatever. So I think that not enough people actually introduce their wives or their girlfriends or family members that if it wasn't, I think, for my wife being there and helping me through a lot of tough times, I probably wouldn't be standing up here today talking to you.
I
because
know
she kept me
exactly what
going.
you mean.
So.
Yeah.
I think it depends on your. I think it depends on your approach to how you're going to break into business. You were very driven, and so you were at it very hard for a very concentrated period of time, but not necessarily the only way you can do it. But it certainly worked out for us.
Like I said from the beginning, when I started collecting every comic book, I'm psychotic. When I put my nose down, I become obsessive with things.
Well, Wanda, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to be married to a guy who is that obsessive about something? And I might add, that's successful at it. I mean, it's a whole new career. You're in showbiz.
It is, yeah, and it's funny because where we live, people don't pay much attention.
Vancouver, right?
Right, Vancouver Island. People don't really pay much attention. There's the odd kid that's a collector, and they're very excited when they meet him, but it's such a different world when you go to a convention or something like this, but particularly a convention where there's hundreds of kids lined up, sometimes thousands, to see him, and I just look around and go, wow, this is very strange.
It's a good feeling, though,
It is
isn't
a great feeling.
How does Cyan react to all of this?
Well, this is brand new for her. She's just 6 weeks old today, actually.
I think
and
that's
so,
great.
So
But see, I'm already working on her because she could possibly be like, kids want to know whether there's going to be a Spidey baby. See, and this is why I bought this here, because then at any moment when she senses danger, see, then she could just come in here and Spidey baby, she's ready to go, and we're off. And
I wondered why you had her sticking to the wall when I first met her. That's terrific.
Well, I think we're getting hungry, so I think we'll leave you guys to the rest of your interview, but thank you for inviting me.
Hey, thanks
It's been
so
fun.
much for coming and
Okay.
kind of rounding this thing out. And it was great seeing you,
Okay,
Wanda. And
bye-bye.
Cyan, remember now, when we need a spider baby, who knows? Boy, when you realize that most artists need motivation, I'd say, Todd, that you have two of the greatest motivating factors I've ever seen there. You've got a lovely family.
Thank you,
I
thank you.
congratulate you. Now, you mentioned Vancouver. You live in Vancouver, or more accurately, Vancouver Island,
Right,
as
right.
you've told me a moment ago.
Yep.
And I was just wondering, what's it like? That's pretty far from New York, where most of the comic publishers are.
Yep.
What's it like to be working so far away? Is it more difficult or easier because nobody's bothering you, or what?
For me, I mean, I've always worked at a small town ever since I broke in. So for me, it's not really a change. I mean, I grew up in a few big cities, but since I broke into comic books, I've been living in small towns. You know, my attitude is, I know a lot of guys that live in New York, and with Federal Express and those kind of courier services now, you can live literally any place on the planet, not just in North America. I feel that if you don't live near the hub, and they know you're going to come in every Tuesday at 12 o'clock, that if they go out of their way to FedEx you something or get on a phone call and make a long-distance phone call, they probably want you a little bit more. Because a guy who's coming in every day at noon, then they go, well, let's phone Todd or Bill or George or Fred to do this job. And if they all say no, then the guy who walks in at noon, we know he's coming in at noon. So he's our fifth choice. So I always figured that if you move away and they still kind of hunt you down, then that tells you something about, like, you know, where you're standing and how much in demand you are amongst some of the other things.
And you can keep testing it. You can keep moving further and further to make sure. If ever you have any feeling of insecurity.
That was it. People go, why do you live on Vancouver Island? And because I live up in Canada off the West Coast, which is about as far away from New York as I can get. And to go any further, I'd have to go to Japan because that's the next piece of land. But
I thought you were going to say that's the next plan I have.
Yeah, well, maybe. But I don't know. Like I said, people... For me, I've always worked in isolation, so I always figured that by working in isolation, I kind of sink and swim on my own. I'm not influenced by a lot of things that are in LA or New York, and I don't hear a lot of the styles and the gossip and the things that are happening, so I just kind of have to, like, make it up myself. Some of it works, some of it doesn't, but so far it hasn't really come back to haunt me that I'm just going, well, I haven't seen anybody else's stuff because I haven't been up to the office, so, well, this would be cool if I did it this way. So in some respects, I think it's made me think a lot more than if I had more creative input around me.
Every artist works differently, and every artist has a different opinion and a different philosophy about his work. Some of them like to be right in the hub. You're better off, you feel, further away. But what it really comes down to is the basic talent itself. And it's almost like when you build a better mousetrap, they say the world will beat a path to your door. I think if you've got the stuff, whether you're in Vancouver or Mars or right in the heart of New York, somehow you'll be discovered, it'll come out, and then you just work the way you're the happiest. But everybody is going to want you when you're really good. I mean, look at me. I could have had my choice of anybody up here. And I got to tell you one thing. It is so great working in the comic book business because so many of the guys are like a Todd McFarlane, where you don't feel you're working. I mean, it's fun. You're just with friends and people you admire and respect. And speaking of that, you had mentioned to me earlier before we started that John Romita had visited you in Vancouver. And Romita is John is one of my absolute all-time favorite people. Tell us a little about it.
John Romita's, maybe some of the people don't know, did a long body of work on Spider-Man with yourself. When I came into the office to pick up a new book and ended up getting offered a Spider-Man book.
He's the art director at Marvel
Right,
now.
He's now the art director, right? And he had laid down what I consider the definitive Spider-Man. I mean, Ditko had started it and did it the
Steve Ditko, the guy who started it.
Steve Ditko had done the artwork on the first 40 issues with you, and kind of laid down kind of a quirky style, but it was actually John Romita who does the Spider-Man that I tell people is on pajamas and is on the towels and is on the bubblegum wrappers. You know, that definitive look. Well, my attitude has always been, well, if you're going to do something, you got to get notice. I don't care what it is, even if it's bad notice. That's better than no notice at all. So they kind of wanted me to draw like John Romita, and I didn't want to do it because it's like becoming a painter and saying, well, I'm going to do like Michelangelo or Norman Rockwell. But the best you can hope for is to be almost as good as Norman Rockwell. That's the best you can hope for. So I go, the only thing I can be is either almost as good as John Romita, or I can go out there and make a career for myself. Now, when you do those kind of things, you don't state those facts. It ends up looking like you're bucking the system somewhat, because it's like, oh my gosh, well, why is he changing this and this and this and this when we've done it a certain way? But it was more out of a respect to John, because I just go, I can't add nothing to his stuff. I couldn't add. So what I did is I go, well, I try to pick the best of what Steve Ditko did, which was that quirky, kind of funky style. And then I took what I thought John Romita brought to it, which was the pretty people, the great storytelling. I mean, everything was perfect on John's stuff. Kind of meld the two of them together and mix in like a 90s flair with it and kind of spit it back out on the page. And it seemed to work. I mean, it seemed to work. I mean, I made a couple of cosmetic changes with the eyes and with hairdos. And
you made the eye spaces about 10 times bigger, the whites of the eyes.
Yeah, but again, I mean, those are kind of things that when you get on a book, you have to kind of get into it and go, well, Spider-Man, I always felt that some of the guys at a certain point always made it Spider-Man, emphasis on man. And I know he's actually a man and stuff, but my attitude is quite the opposite. Once he throws on the costume, he doesn't have to be able. His joints can bend, and you know what I mean. He doesn't. I put him in impossible
positions.
Played up
the spider part.
Right. So I do Spider-Man, and I put him in the positions that people go, a human being can't get into it, and I go, you're right, a human being can't, but it looks cool. You know. I mean, you turn the page, and it's like, wow, look at him hyper-extended here and triple-jointed there, and they got webbing all over the place, and it's not realistic. But it's a heck of a comic book shot.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Let me tell you, you said something that I think borders on being profound when you were mentioning that if you copy somebody else or try to work in someone else's style, the most you'll ever be is a good imitation or a good copy. And especially if a guy has his own style down so perfectly that you can't improve on it, all you can do is be similar or change it. But if you change it, if you do something that's your own individualistic style, that's really the way to succeed or to reach the top. And I really think that goes in every field. If you're an actor, you won't get anywhere by imitating a Robert De Niro or a Marlon Brando. You've got to get your own style and your own thing.
Right. Well, I mean, something like okay, in John Romita, I went up there, and a couple of times he sat me down, and I always tell people, if you go up to Marvel or you go up to DC comic books, to talk to people like Dick Giordano and to John Romita, who've been around for years, and they don't tell you to draw. I rarely tell a kid to draw better, because if it was that simple, I'd walk into the office and they go, draw like Michelangelo, Todd. And so I can't draw like Michelangelo, so I'm not going to tell a kid to go out there and draw better. What I can give them is the same advice that Dick Giordano and John Romita gave me, which is the technical side of it. This is how you do establishing shots. This is how you move characters in and out. This is how you do this. Maybe be on the lookout for these 5 points, and all of a sudden, when I walk out of there, I'm now aware, the next time I do that page, I'm now aware of 5 new things. If nobody ever tells you about it, you're not aware of it. So the more things that you can make people aware of, the better. Now, if they say the introduction is show the establishing shot of the outside of a house, that can be done 1,000 ways. A guy maybe who doesn't have quite that much talent or is young and whatever, he might just do a nice standard bland shot, but somebody else might shoot it through, let's say, a bunch of trees. There might even be a spider web in the trees, and then you can see the silhouette of the shack through. I mean, and I'm just going from, or, you know, a down shot in between, like birds fluttering around or whatever it is.
Well, as you were mentioning before, it's a case of taking something and being able to make it interesting.
Right.
And it depends on how you present it. And I think, again, that's one of the differences between a really top comic book artist and just a good artist. You know, there's an artist named Alex Raymond. You probably know his work. He used to do Flash Gordon, and he was wonderful. But then he did Secret Agent X9, I think, and he did Rip Kirby newspaper strips. They were the most beautifully drawn strips you could ever find anywhere. And he was an artist. All the artists used to use him for reference if they wanted to know the correct way to draw a hand or a figure or a smile or anything. But his work never, when he did Rip Kirby and Secret Agent X9, I think he did another, I've forgotten, it didn't really catch the fans. It didn't meet with their approval. Nobody got excited about it. It was so perfect and photographic and well drawn, but it had no excitement and no quality, which he did have when he did Flash Gordon.
Right. Well, even like Bern Hogarth, who did Tarzan, did the perfect Tarzan, and Tarzan was a beautiful. There's guys out. There's a lot of guys out there that you got to find your niche.
Perfect anatomy, and they do everything perfectly, but there's no excitement.
Yeah, and superhero comic books, like I said before, I think superhero comic books are over-exaggeration, melodramatic. Everything has got to be the perfect stuff. only works on the odd occasion, and otherwise everything else has got to be pompous and a lot of glitz and whatever. Now, it's up to the writer to throw interesting stories in there, make the characters interesting, but while you're making Aunt May or whoever interesting while she's pouring coffee, I don't care really what you're putting in verbally. All I know is that you got to bring across these 4 points of information so that the comic book will move. But I'm just not going to show you a headshot of her talking while you're making that information. I've got to make it visually interesting. Like you're saying, whether it's a close-up of her pouring the coffee and her reflections in there, you can give me the information, but I still have to make it look visually. As a matter of fact, we could be doing a voiceover on it. Somebody might be talking about their past life, and I could be doing something completely different.
But you know, it's all part of your personality. Now, take you right now. You're sitting here and you're talking about whatever you're talking about. I've been paying no attention, so I don't know what it is. But you're doing it with expression, you're doing it with emotion, and you're actually doing it with a little bit of excitement. Now, I could be sitting here with some other guy who'd be saying, yes, well, I wake up early in the morning and I go to my board and I draw, and after 2 minutes the audience would be asleep or they'd get their money back from the tape. Now, this tape, I guarantee, people are going to save it and it'll increase in value and it'll end up in the Smithsonian. But what I mean is, it depends really on something inside of somebody, how much personality they have. And to me, it's all show business. Everything is entertainment, whether it's comic books or writing novels or being an actor or being a screenwriter or whatever it is. You've got to find a way to make it exciting, and I think you are one of the top people who have that ability to do it. And I was just wondering, how would you, well, I think you have explained it in a sense. Even if you take somebody pouring a cup of coffee, you'll find a way to make it exciting by the reflection of the cup or by the angle or the perspective, because you can't see it in a dull way. You know, it's got to be exciting.
Right. Well, the one little story that I tell the kids that they seem to like is, and I usually do this when I'm at a convention or something, I got the whole crowd there, is my whole essence of what comic books is I could take a character like Thor and I could make a poster of him picking his nose, and the kids would buy it. Now, I usually get like a little bit
I'd say it would be a collector's item.
Yeah, well, and they laugh, and they go, there's no way. I mean, he's picking his nose, there's no way you can do it. And the way you can do it is by doing all the things that make comic book interesting. Now, when I draw Thor, Thor does not stand there like you and I. Thor stands there, his legs would be bow-legged, his chest would be barreled out. In the one hand, he's got his hammer. He'd be holding his hammer, again, with a tight, clenched fist, so that his veins were rippling through his arm right here. I'd give him wings on his helmet that were fluttering in the wind, twisting and turning. He's got long hair like a girl. It would be coming over his face, blowing out here.
The wind has to be blowing.
Oh, the wind's got to be blowing.
And that cape has to be blowing.
And the cape would be all over the place. The hair would be all over the place. I'd have dust billowing up at his feet. And hidden in all that, he'd be sitting there with his left hand, getting that little booger there, and you want to know what? You wouldn't even know that he was picking his nose. So the point is, if I can make a guy picking his nose exciting, then I can make him slugging somebody easily exciting. So,
it's a great story.
And those are the things that the kids out there that are trying to aspire into being artists have got to look at. They've got to make everything exciting, 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 and then people go, wow, 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 and hope that you get tagged up with a writer that also is going to make it so that it's a product that's not just glitzy artwork, that's also going to be a good read on top of it.
You know, I want to tell you, it's just my luck. I got a show like this, and I have to get a fella who won't say anything. It's like pulling teeth, dragging the words out of him, and I don't know how we're going to handle it. But look, you were talking about drawing, and we must have a lot of people watching this cassette right now and saying, all this talk, 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 why can't we see Todd draw something? Yeah. How does the guy draw? What does he look like? And I think it would be great. Now, we haven't practiced or rehearsed this. I have no idea how we're going to do it. Okay. But is there any way that we can get the camera on and get a piece of paper and something for you and actually let everybody see you do a drawing? Can we do that? Let's try it, okay? You want to get over to the board?
Yep.
Here we go.
Good.
Okay, Todd, why don't we come over here and let you do your thing?
My thing. Okay, one of the first things that I try to tell kids to do, this would just be the Todd McFarlane, how to do comic books, and then I'll get into some of the technical things. And one of the things is that if they say we got, let's say, Spider-Man swinging over the city, I've seen 100 times, now this isn't going to be that complicated, but I've seen 100 times done before. Here, we'll make Spider-Man here. I'll get it a little more fine once. But let's just say here's the body here with a little spider on it. Here's the groin area. But then what they do is they put like a leg here, and they bend the leg here. Okay, it was a fine bend or whatever. And then he's holding the webbing up in here. And the other one, maybe he's holding the webbing up in here, and he's got some nice little webbing going here. Now, the one thing I try to tell people is that we're drawn on 2 dimensions, and we've got to give the illusion of 3 dimensions. And I think that a lot of kids, the artists that they like the best, they probably don't even really know why they like them other than they draw cool capes and stuff. But one of the things is the good artists can usually take a figure like this and run the camera all around it and move it all over. The reason I don't like this, and it's good for the beginner who's trying to learn and put all the anatomy, is this is Spider-Man swinging over the city. I can get a sandwich board, 2 big pieces of plywood, and I can put one in front of him and one in back of him, and it wouldn't bug him. You know what I mean? I could put a big rubber band and he could still swing because there's no foreshortening, there's nothing else there. So one of the things that I like to get the kids to think about is to give as many planes as possible, since this is only 2-dimensional right here, we've got to make it 3-dimensional. So one of the things that I try to get the kids to think about is if you're going to have somebody slugging somebody or swinging or whatever, but the first thing we'll do, let's say if I was going to draw back, here would be the collarbone, the top of the collarbone. This would be the back up in here, like this. Now, because, let's say the Spidey emblem was here or whatever, we want to make the head off-center, because if it's on-center, when everything looks polite, then the picture looks way too polite. So if we can get a guy's head off the center of his body right up in here, then we've given the illusion now that his head is in front of this shoulder up in here. Now, if we're going to throw a foot, let's say we're going to throw a foot up in here, we'll put one. Let's say we'll make a foot right here, and since we got to have the foot here, well, the only way we can get it back to his butt back here is if we bring it back up in here, and then his leg is going to go back down in here. We'd make his arm, let's say, come here, and as a matter of fact, let's even cut it in front of his face, and then kink his wrist here, and then kink all the fingers even. I mean, the fingers are like 3 or 4 planes in and of themselves. So in other words,
they don't teach kinking in school at the moment.
I know they don't, but the point that I'm trying to get at with kids, okay, then we'd have, let's say, a leg foreshortened back here, and here would be his foot, and then we'd have, let's say, the other arm holding some webbing back in here. Now, the point I'm trying to make, and I know this is rough for the kids, I can clean up a little bit later, is that if I put a hand in front of a face, I've given the illusion that there's this plane,
there's
depth in it, that his face is back here. Now, one arm's going this way, one arm's going this way. I've given 2 planes. Kink the wrist. I've given 3, and I can get another 3 on the fingers and another 3 on this finger. I can give you 15 planes if I want to turn it a 45-degree angle right here. If I put the head off center and I put an arm back in here, I've got to hide part of the arm. So by shoving a hand directly at the camera that's real big and one back, or twisting the body, you've now given the illusion that this guy's warping all over the place. It becomes a tough thing, and part of it is I get paid to draw 10 hours a day, so I mean, you get better and better and better. If you look at some of my early stuff, I wasn't able to do that. But one of the gimmicks that I try to tell kids is to literally just take two pieces of lines, or 2 drawings of lines, whatever. Okay, we'll go one's here and we'll go one here, and squeeze a body in there. Because if you can squeeze a body in there, then you can probably twist them at any way. So now I've got 2 lines here. I mean, even now I'm going to maybe put myself in a bad spot. But what I'll do here is we'll make this his kneecap right in here.
You'll need a lot of kinking for this one.
Oh, yeah, lots of kinking and lots of foreshortening. So then I can come down in here. I'll have his foot up in here. This other foot can come, this would be here. I'll maybe make his other foot hidden back in here. I'll have his body twisted over this way with one of his arms coming up over here. And then I draw his head up and over here. Here's his big eyeball, cool.
Oh,
and
I
then
get it now.
And
That's
then I have
great.
maybe one of his arms up in here hidden. If he's got a belt, make the belt running off around his waist. If he's got a rope, make it going. If he's got a cape, even better. I mean, a cape's the easiest way to give action to something that's not happening. I can make a Batman or Superman, again, standing there doing nothing, but the cape's rippling all over.
You've got to have that wind blowing the cape
So there's an
dramatically.
illusion that actually he's standing there in the wind, so there's some dimension even with the wind and stuff like that. What I do, because the character I've been drawing, Spider-Man, doesn't have a cape, and I love guys with cape because that's the easiest gimmick. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to know anatomy, because what you do is you kind of put the cape over the leg. That's why Batman's easy to kind of draw, because you just cover the body through a couple
Anything
hands.
you're not good at drawing, you
Oh,
cover
you
with
hide,
the cape.
you hide it. Oh, yeah, yeah. Except from the very beginning. But because he doesn't have a cape, what all I can do is do, let's say, a spider web. So if I'm going to do a spider web, I'm not just going to have this nice, pretty spider web. I'm going to have the spider web come here, hidden behind a leg, twisted upon itself, just like a rope, coming back up in here, and then maybe even wrapping back up and around him up in here. So now, even the illusion I've given of depth with the spider web helps to all the different ways that I've twisted and I've contorted the body. Another thing is that sometimes people, like you're saying, get too tied down with like the realism of what makes a comic book and stuff. Some people kind of, I get a lot of kids, as a matter of fact, and I've been able to, I guess, baffle them with my BS, and they call it a style now. Thank you, kids. But they go, wow, you put in so much detail. You do this, you do that. My detail doesn't amount to anything. It's not anything. And I always tell people, I don't care if you could draw a good building or a good car. You got to draw Superman first. So I've yet to have a kid run up to me going, Toddy, you draw the coolest 57 Buicks I've ever seen. No, 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 no. They go, wow, that was a cool Spider-Man. That was a cool Superman. That was a cool rutabaga guy. And if you can draw a good Buick 57 behind them and a good building and a good tree, all the better. But I've seen guys that can only draw good superheroes and can't draw a very good Buick 57, and they're still great artists.
Let me ask you about the webbing. Aren't you the first guy to make a work of art out of the webbing? I mean, to start making the webbing look as if it was three-dimensional?
I believe in giving credit where credit's due. I pulled the idea when I was collecting comic book. There was an obscure shot that was done years ago. They did a portfolio shot. An artist by the name of Michael Golden did a shot, and there was this one panel, and it's funny as it was, I saw that when I was maybe 18, and I broke into comic books when I was 24, that I saw that shot, and I go, if I ever break into comic books, and if I ever work for Marvel, and if I ever draw Spider-Man, I'm going to remember that.
Really? I didn't know
and by
that.
fluke, I ended up getting to draw Spider-Man. So again, I never forgot that. I got to remember like an elephant on a lot of things. So I pulled it out. Now, Michael Golden did the first version of it. The only thing that I can take credit for is that I popularized it. You know, I did it so much. I call it spaghetti webbing because Tom DeFalco, the editor of Marvel Comics, that's what he dubbed it one day when he didn't really like it. And he goes, I don't like those spaghetti webbings. So I'm going, so now I curse him by calling it spaghetti webbings and getting the kids to call it spaghetti webbings just to bug Tommy sometimes. But the reason I did what I did was that the old...
Why don't you just do a little of the webbing, because there may be some people watching that haven't seen it.
Okay.
They wonder what we're talking about.
The old way they used to make it, if this was Spider-Man's hand here, and here's his finger, and here's his finger, and here's his thumb, and he's kind of squirting it out. The way they used to do it was just lines like this,
right.
And then they used to kind of put X's in it. And it worked for years and years and years, but the only thing about this is if I try to shoot that towards the camera, again, with the plane, all you get is bigger X's, you know, and I couldn't use it. So I go, oh, I got to come up with a way, and I remember the way that Michael Golden did it, that I can actually shoot it towards the camera and it doesn't lose what it's supposed to be. Now, I'm kind of psychotic, again, with the way that I do the webbing. If you actually look at one of my drawings, it's continued. There's one strand that literally continues from beginning to end. Most people probably don't follow it, but that's how come it's laborious. And what I would do is I'd come in here and I'd give it about 2 or 3 strands, and then I'd come in there with one single strand here, and I'd wrap it again. By wrapping it in and out, I give illusion even to something as stupid and as trivial as the webbing. Then maybe I'd come in here and I'd maybe give it 2 or 3 ropes. And whenever you wrap something, it doesn't necessarily mean they're all up. I can give one down, one big, one small. I continue the webbing in between here, bring it down here again, and then bring this back around up like this, and so on and so on. Sometimes it takes me 2 hours just to do the webbing in one page. And I hate myself that I started doing this because I can't go back now, because if I don't, then the kids are going to say, ah, you're getting lazy, you're getting lazy. But in a lot of terms, I think it's good, and one of the things I try to shy kids away from too is I go, I can draw 2 books, I could draw 3, I'm fast. I believe you should do 1 dynamite book instead of 3 average books, because in the long run it's going to pay off for you.
Couldn't agree with you more.
And what ends up happening is that people sometimes water themselves down, and so could I draw this a faster way? You darn right. I could cross the lines. I could do this. I didn't even have to draw this. This is a heck of a lot faster, X, 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 X. But I figured if I did something that was a little bit different, again, my career was budding. I had to let people notice me so that I get another job, is if I labor over this today, down the line, I think it will pay dividends down the line. A lot of people seem to be short-sighted on a lot of things. So
How does it feel to know that someday in the future they'll talk of you as the man who popularized three-dimensional perspective webbing? I mean, boy, that's a distinctive trait. Nobody else will have anything like that.
well, I guess the one thing that would be nice about it is I wanted to do a body of work on Spider-Man, and I felt that that Steve Ditko, who we were talking about earlier, and John Romita both were on the books long enough that they did a body of work, that it would be nice, if nothing else, that 25 years from now, when they throw out 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 names on Spider-Man, on the artistic side of it, that maybe my name might also be in there, because I added something to that character. You know what I mean?
Well, you
that
certainly did.
That maybe something will be there that somebody can come along. On the downside, I hate to say it, Stan, on the downside is, because it becomes so popular, a lot of the people following now in the Spider-Man steps were they wanted me to draw like John Romita, and I said no, again, out of respect. If I was younger, I probably would have done it. But again, I was at that cocky stage going, no, I want to do it my way or the highway. That kids are now starting to come in there and starting to draw it their own way, and I'd like to caution kids, just because Todd did something popular or whoever else, do it your own way, because you might do something that might be 10 times more popular that nobody's thought of yet. And if you just keep emulating what's been down, you're never going to come up with that one that we go, oh, why didn't I think of that first?
I think that's probably the most important thing that we've been saying and you've been repeating during this particular show, and that is to do it their own way, whatever they do. Do it the best they can in their own style, because when you copy someone else, the best that you can be is a good copy.
Now, I'll go over a couple of the techniques that some of the kids can get out of some of their drawings. We've got a few pages here that I can show.
Excuse me, I just thought, can you imagine someone saying, yeah, so this is this guy Todd McFarlane, that great artist, this is what he draws, and wondering.
Those are those Pictionary drawings, you know what I mean? You got to be in and out of there in 10 seconds. One of the things that I want to show to kids is, as long as you give a good establishing shot first, you can buffalo your way through any other page. So, in other words, if I'm going to have a guy flying through the air, here he is flying through the air, and he's looking really majestic, dun, 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 and he's flying here again in perspective, kids, let's not do it, and he's zipping 100 miles an hour, wang, wang, wang. I don't know that he's flying in the bathroom or where he's flying. The easiest thing I tell kids, if he's flying, let people have no doubt where the person is. Easiest thing to do, zip, 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 zip. We got clouds. Instantly puts them in the air. Better yet, throw a bird in there. And as a matter of fact, kids, don't throw the bird here. Throw a couple of small ones here, and then maybe throw a big one that might actually cut in front of the guy here. So then again, you've given the plane that there's depth. Even with the birds, there's depth there. Do your buildings here, and I always say do sliver backgrounds. There's 1,000 ways to do it. All you got to do is throw a little bit of a sliver of a building here, couple windows, and now, I hate to say it, but there's no doubt, I don't care how blind you are, that this guy is not in the air. You got clouds, birds, and buildings. Well, of course the guy's up in the air. Once you ground him, then you've also got to do the same thing. You've got to ground him by showing something. Maybe the tree is behind him that's taller than him. Maybe the building is there, so a window's on top, and maybe a car is parked in front of him.
The chewing gum wrapper on the sidewalk.
Yeah, anything that does it. Also, the other thing, too, is when you're moving people in and out of like a room, you want to move them in and out of a room in such a way that there's no, my first panel should be, if I'm going to show them, here's my first panel. Let's divide this in half. My first panel is there's 6 or 7 people talking in the living room. First thing is, well, what living room? Well, of course, we've got to have the house here. So here's the house. And I know this is breaking your heart, kids, that this isn't really detailed, but we got a time thing here. I've got an establishing shot with the house. I next go into, okay, I'll do a little bit of a down shot. I'll do a down shot here of some of the furniture and some of the TV or whatever's there, and then I'll establish the people standing, maybe one standing here and a couple are sitting and whatever else. If somebody comes in or out of that room, you've got to show them. So, and you don't have to show them by literally the guy's turning the knob, walking in the door. If this person right here is pouring coffee, you can easily do it by, here's the person still pouring the coffee with the big smile on their face. Hi, how are you? Still pouring the coffee. Here's the coffee mug here. Still pouring it. Here's the billowing smoke. Looks really cool. Kids like it. And over the shoulder is the door, and you see the person walking in right in here. So it doesn't have to be so blatant that the guy's walking in. And that can be done if somebody says, excuse me, I got to go check something, that they can walk out. But you still have this person still talking. They've given all the information, because this is where the writer's going to write up in here. But you still have moved the action so this guy is left, even if it was behind their back.
And by showing him pouring the coffee and establishing that he's pouring coffee there, you've given a continuity to it, so it doesn't look as if it's just broken continuity. And one thing that you've done, without thinking, because it comes instinctively to you, you've put this small, even though this is small, you've put it right in the center of the panel in a place where the eye will go to it. You've kept space around it. You've got a curved line there. Everything in this panel, which you probably weren't even thinking of, the balloon here, the curved line here, this little bit of detail here, is focusing the eye on this small thing so you can't miss it, small as it is.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Whatever. It seems to work. It seems to work. I mean, now...
But you've got a natural sense of layout, is what I'm trying to say, because the layout is so important. And very often a fellow will draw something small, and you lose it in the panel because it's small. But if it's laid out correctly, no matter how small it is, you can make it stand out. And as I say, you've done this automatically.
See, one of the other things I try to get kids to is no matter what the page is, there should be one impact panel. Now, maybe it's sometimes impossible to do, but that impact panel could be, like I said, if it's the person pouring the coffee, maybe I'd make the panel go from head to toe all the way up, and then I would have that dark eye, because they might have just said something like, you know, Joni's missing or something like that. I've got the deep eye here, do a nice reflection in there, do the big close-up, and then, like I said, I can do whatever it is. If they're smoking, I'll cut some of the smoke in and out of the panel. I might even have it actually break the borders of the panel. But even though they're saying, oh my gosh, Joni's missing, which is the writer's, you know, job to kind of get some of the interest in, that big riveting eyeball, you're going, oh, well, I mean, it must be something intense that they're saying at that point. If they got a scorn on their face, if they're going to laugh, really make them laugh. Let them know that they're not having a conversation. Some things they're going to say is going to be, you know, I'm concerned about this, but the next panel they can go, you're concerned about that. Well, you're always worried about that, you little Willie. And they could be saying something so they can even, you know, go from being kind of concerned to a kind of a joke within one panel, even though you're still bringing across all the information across that you're trying to get. Now, like I said, once you get to the action stuff, kids, good night. When you get to the action stuff, I've got a couple finished products here that might be a little more, that the kids can see what's happening here.
Oh, that's great.
Spider-Man here, forget what the dialogue says for the moment. I know he's not saying pass the tea and crumpet, though. You know, he's hunched over. His hands, as you can see, they're taut right here. And if I could show the veins in the hand, I would. This one's there. He's got that big bow-legged spread eagle that the superheroes do. And it's like, you can tell that he's not really in a good mood, whatever it is.
It's a tense situation.
Yeah, that he's there. And so when I'm saying, now, what's in the background? Who knows? You know, I do this artsy-fartsy stuff. Kids call it style. Thank you again. And all of a sudden, it fills up the page, and the kids go, wow, look at all the detail. Look at all the detail. You do a little bit of silhouette. Wow, look at all the detail. I do a lot of this line work, a lot of cross-hatching or something like that. Again, here's a body. Is he going to hold them up? Yeah, he's not holding them up right here, as you can see. He's holding them up straight over his head. I mean, you're going to pick a guy up, pick him up. Hide the anatomy with the cape. Cool, he's out of there. Spider-Man shoots some webbing onto the back, so I've got to indicate that there's the webbing being attached to the flaming guy's head. So here's how you can tell it's the guy with the flame.
And here's that one strand of webbing you were talking about that goes all the way through.
It's a pain in the rear, right? And then when he pulls him off and says back off, he's pulling him off like 100 miles an hour. Here's little Spider-Man here. He's ripping him off. You know, he's not saying get out of the way like you and I would do. They're ripping them off. And again, those are my personal opinion on how to do superhero comic books only.
It's been wonderful having you here. I have to relent to do that. And I think that everybody watching this cassette, and I'm hoping there will be millions of them, now realize why we call the series Visits with the Comic Book Greats, because you certainly are one of them, and it's been a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Right.